Hello, this is a pre-recording of what I'm aiming to present at the workshop looking at making universities universally accessible and a workshop to find access solutions. Why should you bother? Why is it important to make universities universally accessible? This is my own personal mission statement to remove the barriers to accessing life so people can express their brilliance. And basically, universities are one tool that we can use as a society to enable people to express their brilliance. And I really do think it's important that as a university, we have a responsibility to ensure that everybody can access university life if they have an academic type brain, that they can access the opportunities and the education and the research that a university can provide to them. The core values that I hold as critically important in this sort of a discussion is that everybody is respectful, everybody tries to be fair, and we try to be as honest as possible about this sort of stuff. We are very much going to be informed by the social model of disability, and I think this can be applied to activism as well. And this shifts the responsibility for change from the disabled person to the society. I am not disabled as a wheelchair user by using a wheelchair. I am disabled by you as a society only providing steps into a building. So when we think about training, we really should, of people around disability access, we really should be focusing on everybody's responsibility to take action. Absolutely, the changes should be informed by disabled people, but they should not be the ones responsible for enacting all of the change, responsible for driving all the change, responsible for making most of the change themselves. It is important that the university as a body, as people, as employees of the university, that you take personal responsibility to make those changes. Activism and advocacy, I believe, is absolutely necessary to overturn the societal norms which are, unfortunately, highly ableist. I think, like I say, you've got to really realise that I do believe that access is a right, not a privilege. We're not asking for special treatment. We are asking for an equity of access to the university and what it can offer. So we're not asking for specials. We're asking for stuff that will help us actually access to a similar standard to an able-bodied person would be able to be. And one of the things that we will talk about more in a little minute is that disabled people really should be trusted to identify their own needs. We really should be looking at all of our processes and go, is this reasonable to require this level of evidence, this level of complexity, this much form filling, this much overhead of paperwork and load on disabled people, just so they can access a similar standard of provision to their able-bodied peers. And like I say, I'm going to be challenging you that needs to change. I'm also going to highlight to you that we do have these societal myths about an ideal academic, an ideal student, an ideal employee, that when you actually unpack them are completely unsustainable, impossible, and completely off this world in terms of practicalities or reasonableness. I always talk about academics in particular being regarded as brains on sticks. We should be disembodied and totally unemotional. We should absolutely not have any social responsibilities or a life outside of the university. We should be able and willing to work 24/7, 365 days a year. And we should be able to work all that time at 100% standard. All of that time. Of course, this usually means that we will be male, white, and well financed, not necessarily by the university salary, but well financed anyway. We will be able to meet every single deadline, say yes to every single work request, respond immediately to every single email, be willing to be on and chair any committee we're asked to do, and, God help us, enjoy social networking. As you can imagine, I don't think these are reasonable standards, but actually when you look at policies and procedures and the expectations of the university as a whole, it is not uncommon that those are implicit expectations within the processes available. So within these workshops, I really want to shift that. I really want to change it. I want it to be reasonable, and let's have reasonable norms here. Let me encourage you to be as brave as possible, to speak up and ask questions. Let's challenge those assumptions, and let's aim as high as possible in terms of accessibility. I frequently get told that I have unreasonable expectations, but as I said in my talk, we've been waiting a long time, and all we want to do is have the same access, a similar level of access as other people without disabilities. That is not an unreasonable expectation. But I would say also, let's be gentle to each other. Everybody here comes from a different place, from a different history, from different personal experiences of disability and illness. I will expect mistakes in language and ideas, and let's challenge those, but gently. Let's respond in a humane way to everybody and accept that some things might be more delicate than others, and you won't necessarily know until you unpick those. Please be gentle, not judgmental. Chatham House rules plus, please keep what's said here in this workshop confidential. It really is important that we feel we can speak out and talk about failings, personal and systemic, and feel that we won't be held up for this in public. This is a private conversation that we need to be having to make sure that we can move the university on and improve its accessibility. So don't identify anyone inside this room to anyone outside of this room. When you are discussing this workshop, and I really do hope you do continue to discuss this workshop, be very careful about identifying people either directly or indirectly in terms of specific cases and situations. In particular, be sure if you're going to speak about anybody's personal disability that you have explicit permission to mention that in public. Disability is still stigmatized, it is still problematic, it is still damaging to your career. You do not have permission to share that information outside of this room if somebody has been so brave and kind as to disclose their personal disability here. We do only have 2 hours, so it's very limited time, and I know that the University of Saskatchewan has relatively limited resources. We may not solve all of the problems here to the depth and detail required. I would encourage you to continue to talk to me. I am willing to be generous with my time as far as I can. I think if we get into bigger projects and things like that, then we will have to talk about consultancy fees. But for the occasional query or other events like this, then yes, come and talk to me. Let's see what we can do. The main thing I want is for everybody to go away from this workshop with specific actions to undertake this year. Yes, before Christmas. Yes, I do mean that quickly. Yes, that is completely unreasonable. Yes, I do actually mean that. And I want every single person in this room to go away with that sort of a target. I would really like to re-highlight the Lund University core values work, particularly the suppression techniques, which are really very obvious once we start talking about this sort of stuff, that disabilities are made invisible, that we are ridiculed, that information is withheld from us, that we are double-blinded, and that the arguments made about why we need access and all the rest of it are made impossible, and that we are blamed and shamed. And we really need to be aware of those suppressing techniques and be aware that we have to challenge those. So I went and had a look at your website, and I thought, right, so what's the first thing that we're going to want to really talk about is maybe teaching access. Let's start with, do you expect disabled students, lecturers and support staff on your campus? Well, interesting. I'd say no, to be honest, looking at your website. I had a look at your pictures and everything, and these pictures are taken from the front page of your website, And you can see that somebody's really had to think about the gender mix, the colour of skin mix, and the markers of visible diversity such as wearing a veil and so on. That's great. And we've looked at different locations and different activities being undertaken. That's wonderful. I couldn't find a single picture on your website of somebody with a visible disability. And I know this challenge because I've had this challenge at our university as well. And we've only recently created a photo bank of people with visible disabilities. So unfortunately, yes, I do come up a horrendously large amount, but it's incredibly important. If you're sending out a pamphlet, if you're creating a prospectus, you will say to your PR team, we need to have an equal mix of gender. We need to have a diversity of skin colour. We need to have other markers of difference and faith, whether that's an Indigenous person or whether that's a Muslim person of Muslim faith or that sort of thing. We need to have those markers visible and clear and out there. Do you specify that we also need to see people with visible disabilities undertaking all sorts of activities, not just in the disabled access pages, which, by the way, also don't have any pictures? We really need to shift away from diagnoses to access needs. We need to make sure there's an equity of focus on the physical, mental and neurodiverse needs of our students and staff. First question, can you get in? And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in a minute when we look at maps. Can we engage? Can we learn well? Can we research well? Can we access the additional resources? How do you as an institution promote peer support, mentorship, and how do you show your pride in this community, which is societally oppressed? So it's just as much right to be proud of their identity as if you were gay or Indigenous or Black. So like I say, I went rummaging through your website, and finding out about access information and support was a bit challenging. Access on your web pages, well, if you click all the way down to the bottom of the page, yes, there is some stuff about web accessibility, but it's fairly it has very low aspirations. You know, we'll correct known digital accessibility issues where possible. No. They're all correctable. Those digital access is entirely correctable. So all of those should be corrected. You ask for very detailed proofs of disability in order to be able to access disability services. It is relatively rare for people to lie about disability access. Now, I've got no problem with you requiring maybe a higher level of proof to access, say, additional time on the exams or financial services to aid your disability access. However, for accessing a bit of mentorship, a bit of support, a bit of counselling, why are we requiring medical notes, etc.? You know, to require a licensed healthcare professional to fill in a medical questionnaire. I don't know about the Canadian healthcare system, but certainly in Britain, the NHS is in a total state post-COVID. There are huge waiting lists and a massive backlog of waiting times for patients to access services that they need. So asking family practitioners or consultants with a specialism in the particular disability that you have to fill in your university's medical questionnaire might be a genuinely challenging thing to get done in a reasonable time and for a reasonable cost. And I really would challenge your learning disabilities being requiring a psychoeducational assessment that's completed within the last 5 years. What did you think that autism went away? That ADHD migrated with age? No, none of those do. So a psychoeducational assessment done anytime from the year of age 10 or so would be relevant to what's going on with them as an adult. And yeah, do you really need that level of assessment? Or would a family practitioner saying, yes, I believe this person is on the autistic spectrum, be enough for them to gain access to additional resources and support? And also your list of things that will impact life and academic activities seem to be almost entirely focused on specific learning disabilities. So they're looking at concentration, memory, sleep, eating, social interaction, self-care, distractions, timely completion of tasks, regular and timely attendance, making and keeping appointments, stress management, organisation, writing, note-taking, examinations, information processing, retaining of information, group participation, oral presentations. Where would I say I have a visual impairment? Where would I say I have a hearing loss and I use a cochlear implant? Where would I say I need ASL support, American Sign Language interpreters? Where would I say I'm a wheelchair user and I need to make sure that all of my classes are in accessible rooms? Your forms do not fit what is needed. And the final thing is that you state that you've got various accessible parking bays and you require, again, quite a high level of medical evidence to prove to have access to those. Maybe some degree of relevance, because yes, those are expensive things to provide. However, for the people to be charged the same as anyone else in that location, what did you think we chose to be a double amputee? That we can choose whether we use the walking stick or not, and whether or not we're in pain and fatigued or not by our rheumatoid arthritis. Did you think we could choose whether or not we do or do not need to park close to the building we work or study in? As we have no choice, surely we should not have to pay for that parking. It's not the same thing. And your access maps, yeah, really hard to find. I had to dive down quite a few pages and in quite a few ways to actually find this. And it claims that this will have designated parking locations and power-assisted entrance doors. Right, so first off, that immediately tells me not all of your external doors are power-assisted. You want to sort that out, particularly all of those that are level access. You really need to sort that out. That is a major thing. At the very least, you need to have a power-assisted entrance door, one per building at the very minimum. But okay, so I went and had a look at your webpage and at the map, and I went and had a look, and unfortunately, yeah, it does tell me the accessible parking locations, but it also tells me, in amongst all of that really overloaded map, about the parking and the bike parking and all of the, there's just far too much on those maps. What we did at UEA was we also discovered this information overload was becoming problematic, and what we end up with having is a base map over which we can overlay the various tabs and things like this, and we have an accessibility tab, and we tell you where there is ramps rather than steps, where there are lifts, where there is accessible parking, and where there are accessible toilets. This is the bare minimum information. I would love it to be far better. It isn't. I would love it to be far more interactive. I would love you to be able to plug in, I'm in this room, I need to get to that room for my next lecture. How do I get there in a step-free route? But we haven't got there yet. We should be able to, but it is a challenge. But yeah, your map really does need substantial work. We also have, both on the map and in physical terms, an orange line that is dotted around the campus, which highlights the step-free routes so that we don't get stuck going and finding the stairs or the steps. And I really want to emphasise that the business of the university also includes research, and that research design should also expect disabled participants, and that we should be looking at really engaging very strongly with our patients or the people that will be impacted by the research to ensure that it is relevant and accessible to the disabled communities. We should be auditing the EDI characteristics, the equality, diversity and inclusion characteristics of the researchers, the participants. We want information sheets that really highlight their accessibility and the accessibility of the research program. And we need to be training our principal investigators and our ethics committees to require this of them. And we need to put in appropriate budgets when we are applying for funds to cover all of the relevant costs attached to being disability accessible. So we're going to do a number of breakout rooms over the course of this workshop, and like I say, this is a pre-recorded version of this. We will also record the workshop, but I'm going to give you an exemplar of what we're going to be talking about. First off is, have people brought specific questions about the access barriers they would like to solve? And might I suggest, if you have brought them, thank you very much, that's brilliant. Bring them to your breakout groups, have a chat about them, think about what you'll need to prioritize, who you need to consult, to what standard are you going to solve them, where you're going to get the funds, what is the timeline that needs to be thought about for implementing these. Another breakout room that we're going to be looking at maybe is looking around accessibility in terms of the various activities a university undertakes. So learning, teaching, research, administration, support, estates, maintenance, catering, cleaning, all of those things. How do we make sure that all of those activities are as accessible as possible? Another breakout room that we may consider, and we're going to talk and decide this on the day, is looking at it from the position of impairments and thinking, if we had a completely blind student and they wanted to study history, how would we support them? If they wanted to be in the labs, how would we support them? If they had an assistance dog, how would we support them? How would that work? Hearing loss, mobility issues, speech, challenging of understanding information as it's presented, mental well-being, energy limitations are a really challenging area and very, very common with many disabilities, dietary restrictions, and of course, toileting needs. So we'll be thinking about that in various breakout rooms and looking at what do we need to look at, what do we need to prioritize, how do we fund it, all of those questions again. And finally, I'm going to highlight my targets, the things that I think that all universities across the world should be doing. I think we really do need to be making sure that we are behaving in a safe manner, that we have evacuation plans for disabled people, that we have lone working plans for them so that we know how they can work safely, how they can be evacuated out of the building when it's needed to be done. We need to implement reasonable accommodation passports and put that into annual reviews so that everybody is asked, what do you need to be adapted to your working practice to maximise your ability to work well for the university and maintain your personal well-being at the same time? We need to normalise reasonable working loads and flexible working, and by that I do include working from home. We need to implement allyship and bystander training so that people have the confidence to step up and say something if they have a concern about accessibility. Basic things like making all staff responsible for spotting a fault, you've got to report it. If that power door's not working, if that lift's out of order, if the hearing loop isn't working, that is stuff that you all have personal responsibility in reporting. We need to set up mentorship programs for students and for staff, peer-to-peer, external support, whatever is needed to really support people that are already struggling within an ableist society to really still shine and succeed. We need to run events such as event access hackathons, pride events, etc., to really challenge that social model, that the social norms of disability being a disadvantage, and showing that actually this can be a huge advantage and that we are proud of disabled staff and students. And we need to maybe accept that universities don't have all the knowledge and we should be accessing external advocates, disability charities, etc., for their expertise and help to help us solve these issues. Finally, I'm going to look at structural access. The reason I like structural access, it really does demonstrate concrete commitment to change. People can see that you've done something different, that you are making changes in the physical structure of the university. However, I do recognise that this is often the most expensive bit of access to implement, but you have to think about the lifetime costs of a building and how expensive it is to retrofit power doors and lifts and all the rest of it back into a building that hasn't been designed well in the first place. And also you have to take into account the opportunity cost to the university and its community of not having this diversity as part of the university community. But I would very much emphasise that structural access is important but not sufficient in of itself. And again, I've got a lot of targets that I would like to achieve on this. We should be creating new builds and refurbishments to the guideline standards that I've created. New equipment and its placement in buildings, in labs, in offices, etc. really should be thought about in terms of accessibility. We should have evacuation chairs or suitable alternatives. Microphones, PA systems, portable hearing loops should be far more standard and should be in every meeting room, every seminar room, every lecture theatre. Basic things like putting these red cord cards onto all of the red cords in all of your accessible toilets really makes a difference, really has impact. And grab a pot of paint and paint a different colour on the walls behind the toilet, behind the sink, and immediately you will improve often the accessibility of your white box accessible toilets. Ones that will take a bit longer to implement, say about 5 years, is that we are going to start encouraging the funders of grants to require minimum access standards for you as a university to be eligible for funds. We are starting to get heard on this in the UK, and where one set of funders leads, others do tend to follow. And this should include mandatory training and audits. We should have an accessible toilet in any building that has standard toilets. That doesn't sound too outrageous, and particularly considering how cold your winters are. Can you imagine how cold it is to have to go outside of the building to find a toilet that's suitable for you? We should be trying to install dual alert fire alarms, audible and visual. We need to think about connectivity standards for equipment so that we can buy standard pieces of kit but make sure that they all connect to a highly accessible control panel, for example. Again, we also need to look at this for hearing technology. We need to implement basic ergonomics around seating, lighting, acoustic environments that are basics that we are getting wrong, that are inhumane, let alone inaccessible. Key routes should have light doors, be step-free, well signposted, etc. So that's the orange routes, that's making sure that key routes through buildings to key lecture theatres, key seminar rooms, etc. are very accessible. That you put in lever taps and D handles on cupboards so that they're more usable, and that you put in place a changing place accessible toilet. So a big one with a hoist, with a bench, within 20 minutes roll of anywhere on your campus. You've got a fairly compact campus, so that's probably one or two across the campus. But within 10 years, I would like those access standards to have shifted upwards, and that we are aiming for maximum accessibility requirements, and that those are required, again, for access to funding. And this, yes, may mean that we have to disinvest or repurpose buildings that are really hard to make accessible. We need to put in things like fire safe lifts, make all the fire exits step free, make most routes have good accessibility, so light doors, step-free access. Let's put a changing place accessible toilet within 10 minutes of anywhere, at any time of the year as well, by the way. And then we need to look at other access issues around fieldwork, boats, planes, etc. Anywhere we're doing work that the university is responsible for. Now again, here's the link to my access guidelines and my email address, and of course with thanks to all the people that have worked with me and funded me. And I hope that we have a really fun set of workshops, that we explore the creativity that you have and try and find new novel solutions and really challenge the status quo that inaccessibility is normal for universities. That should not be the case. We've really got to challenge this and really got to push for maximising accessibility as a core principle of universities. Thank you very much for your time.